this is the beginning of an interview with Mr. Tom Erickson at the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia. Mr. Erickson, can you state for the record your date and place of birth?
March 27th, 1918, Oak Park, Illinois, suburb of Chicago.
Thank you. And can you tell us also what branch of the service you served in and what war?
I was in the Navy in World War II.
Thank you. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing, your family. You were born in Oak Park. Brothers, sisters?
Yes, I have an older brother, older sister, younger brother, and I was raised in Oak Park and finished Oak Park High School there. Berkeley, magnificent educational city, by the way, or town it was. I unfortunately was involved in the Depression because my father was a 7th grade dropout. Is this too much?
Oh, no.
In Milwaukee, I married a Phi Beta Kappa, and so my parents were quite unusual, and they both insisted that we all have good educations, and he learned literally, we learned at home as well as at school. The fact that he rose pretty well in the business world was a great testimonial to him with his minimum education, but it was a reason why I guess my brother and sister and I have always been deeply interested in the educational process, and particularly public education.
So you graduated high school.
Yes.
And what was going on in the world at that time?
Well, it was 1936, which is right in the middle of the Depression, and we went from a nice home and Packard automobile and membership in Oak Park Country Club and that kind of thing to barely able to pay our bills. It was a very difficult time, to say the very least. As a matter of fact, my father finally, he was executive vice president of his company, lost his job, and the only job they could get for him was a sales job in Seattle, Washington. And he left the family, went out there, left my brother and my mother. I'd gone on to college at that time. So the times were wonderful. I had nothing but good things to begin with, and then not immediately, but slowly but surely, where we got to literally paying for food for my family. It was difficult, but we survived thanks to them, and I'm here.
Now you mentioned going on to college. Where was that?
I went to Yale.
You went to Yale?
Yes.
And what years would that have been?
1936 to 1940. I was fortunate, since we had no money, I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship that paid most of the thing. I had to work when I was there. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons I was lucky enough to go, aside from getting the scholarship, was that we didn't have enough money to get me to New Haven, Connecticut from Oak Park. My father couldn't do it. And a member of our church, who was a successful businessman also, but luckier, I guess, than my dad, volunteered to give us $300. And for that $300, I was able to get started and get to New Haven and get moving. And that gentleman only died a few years ago, and I wrote him a letter every Christmas for all his life. I'll never forget it. It changed my whole life.
So when you went to college in Yale, you had certain expectations, but at the same time you were studying. The war is increasing.
See, of course, we didn't get into the war until years after that. I graduated in 1940, and the war really didn't get into it until a couple of years after that. The war in Europe was a terrible problem. Of course, I was on the side of people who said, "Don't get in, don't get in." Mr. Charles Lindbergh was one of the leaders of that movement, and I was all for him. But Pearl Harbor changed all that.
Where were you when Pearl Harbor happened?
I had graduated in 1940 and joined Sears Roebuck in Chicago and as a trainee, and I was sent to Buffalo, New York, and where I, with a Yale degree in my hand, was an assistant to the receiving clerk there. So I had a minimum job. I was elevator operator also, and carried all kinds of merchandise all over the store. And sold at night, retail. And I was there for a year and a half when we declared war. And that was a day I'll never forget, of course. We all stopped working and listened. And
Did
so
you
I
hear?
was in Buffalo.
You heard about it on the radio then?
Well, primarily in newspaper, but radio was it, and we heard Roosevelt's speech all huddled around a radio in the store, customers and us that time, and it was pretty obvious that we were going to be drafted. And I was a 24-year-old, 23-year-old at the time. So I signed up for the Army Air Corps, and they found a congenital defect at the base of my spine they didn't like, so they said, no, go get it fixed and come on back. And I didn't like the way they handled me, so I'm being sensitive, I guess. So I said, I'll fool them, I'll do it with the Navy instead of the Army, which I did and was accepted in 1942.
So in 1942, you joined the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you do your training?
Well, believe it or not, here I was a Chicagoan and working in Buffalo, New York, and I signed up, went to New York City to be enlisted and make my pledges and all that, my final exams. And I think I have to tell you one quick story that I probably shouldn't.
No, go ahead.
I never should admit it. Taking the final exam, physical exam, I passed all the physical exams. I'd played a lot of sports at college and high school, so I was in good shape. Didn't smoke, didn't drink, and all that kind of stuff. So when I finished, the last test I was to take was my eye test. And I had no idea when I was told to, at the end of the test, I did everything pretty well. First of all, when they covered one eye and said, read that, and I read it fine. And I said, now cover that eye, and I didn't read it. My right eye was definitely deficient. And he said, read that again. This was an officer who was doing this to me, and in a darkened room. And I said, he said, read that again. I started in again, and I couldn't make it out. I had visions of, I was signed up to be a pilot, by the way. I wanted to go to pilot training. And he said, at that instant, an enlisted man walked in and said, sir, to the officer, you're wanted on the telephone. The officer said, okay, turned to me and said, sit right here, I'll be right back. And he left. Another man walked by and said, what are you doing here? And I said, waiting to finish my eye test. He said, I'll do it. And he had me read these lines, and I had memorized that one line that he wanted me to write. And to this day, I tell this story to my eye doctor here in Atlanta, and he goes like this, because I never should have flown at all. And I flunked, I think every test I took after that, and they have them when you're promoted and one thing and another, I alibied my way through somehow or other. So the essence of my story is that I never should have been admitted in the first place. But luckily I was, and I was sent, of all places, to Atlanta, Georgia, where I'd never been before. And what is now the Peachtree DeKalb Airport, or DeKalb Peachtree, was the U.S. Naval Air Station here in 1942. I was sent down here to have my elimination-based training, which means flying twin-engine or twin biplane, open cockpit, Stearmans, Grumman's, that kind of thing. The things you see flying around now, here. And that's where I got my first training.
You had decided when you knew that you could be drafted and you were going to enlist that you wanted to be a pilot.
Yes.
Where did that come from in you? What was your exposure?
Well, it's a good question. I'd never been up before. I took one flight from Buffalo back to Chicago in an old AC-3 commercial, like that, and one other time were the only times I'd ever been in the air. But the thing that really got me was a friend of mine. I lived at the YMCA in Buffalo, and a man who had left that early when I got there, after I got there, came back many months later and said, Tom, if you're going to get in the service or join the Navy, join the Navy Air Corps, you want to be a pilot? And I said, well, why not? I love it. And he was the one really that talked me into it, and I was intrigued with it anyway.
Okay, so you're here in Atlanta. How long did that initial training
That
last?
took, I was here from March until July, 3 months. And then we had that training. The most interesting part of that always was the final thing that I thought was scary to begin with, aerial aerobatics. We were doing all kinds of something. I said, I wonder what am I ever going to do that? But it was fun, and we got through it.
And did you do that over the city of Atlanta?
Well, up here, right here, over what's now Buckhead. And when I passed that, I passed my ground school test also, I was sent to Jacksonville, Florida, where I flew more aircraft, including landing on water and on land. The old PBY I went through and was checked out on that, which is a big flying apartment building, as I thought it was what it felt like. And graduated from that, and on December 1st, 1942, I got my wings, which means I went from this to being an officer, an ensign.
So your training was about 9 months.
Well, and yes, before I was an officer, it went from April until December.
Okay, and you brought with you a picture of yourself, if you could show and share that with us.
Okay. This is back when I was young, a long time ago. This was taken about a year or so later after I became a lieutenant J.G. And I had completed my first year of action in the war.
Thank you. So now you're in Jacksonville,
And then I was sent to Sanford, Florida after that for advanced training. And I was a new aircraft, a medium bomber, twin-tail, twin-engine, called the Ventura, which just had come out. It was for fast bombing, in and out fast. It was a speedy plane. We could outrun some fighter planes. And I was in the first class that graduated from this school after being there we were there about 3 months. And this was the primary plane we flew, a PV-1 it was called. And the reason it was so unusual was that it was built for difficult turbulent situations. It's little stub wings and lots of power. And the major purpose was that in any attack, it was in and out fast, and we could outrun fighter planes, as I said. So it was a little tricky in flying because the simple reason it was the stub wing, and you had a much higher speed. You had to go beyond the ground before you took off. And similar to landing, it landed hot, took off hot. And I completed that PV session in Sanford, Florida, and was sent to Whidbey Island, Washington after that, which is the other side of the world.
right. Now this plane is land-based or
Land-based,
aircraft carrier?
strictly land-based, yes. Although we were checked out in other seaplanes and that kind of thing. But this was strictly land-based and never for carriers, or this is strictly land. I never flew on a carrier.
So now you're in Whidbey, on the other
Whidbey
side
Island.
of the...
Yeah, and that was the final training in this, the organization of our squadron, BB-139, which was an organization, 15 planes, 15 senior pilots, crew of 6 in each plane, and a squadron it consisted of that. And we didn't know where we were going to be sent, but we knew we had a lot of training to do, and we did a lot of flying around. Not going to Seattle, we flew down to California and Burbank, and I was groomed, since I was an ensign, I was going to be a co-pilot, not a pilot. And it turned out that my pilot I knew more about the Ventura than my pilot did, because he had been already in combat in other planes, matter of fact, seaplanes, but he knew a lot more about it than I did, so I was fortunate enough to get an excellent pilot for whom I flew co-pilot up there.
The 6 members of your squadron, what were their other positions?
Well, radioman, a gunner, navigator, and then we had a crew captain. And these were all young men and very ranks, but all very well trained. And so our crew of 6 became a team.
And you came together for the first time at Whidbey?
At Whidbey, yeah. Never had met any of them before, including my pilot, with whom I just talked the other day, by the way, after all these years. He's still alive, but all the others are dead.
During this time period that you're in training,
Yeah.
were you eager to get in? I mean, a lot's going on in the war at this time. Were you apprehensive?
I was eager to fly airplanes. I loved being up. I really enjoyed it all the time. I didn't know what we were going to get into, so I didn't know what to think. I didn't want to sit up there and put the island trouble the whole time. I was enough of I guess, an eager young man to say, "Let me at 'em." And maybe that's right, maybe it's wrong, but that was me.
So then from there, did you?
From there, we flew north to the Aleutian Islands, and most people don't know much about the Aleutian Islands, but we were told to go up there, and the plane was rigged. During our training in Whitby, we flew down to Burbank and had Lockheed do some mending down to the planes. Such things as putting a rubber boot on the front of a wing.
Would you like to go ahead and show us the plane?
Yeah. For instance, right here is the wing of the plane, of course, and then the other side the same thing. And they installed boots here, which is a rubber boot that can be pulsated by pressing a buzzer in there. And the purpose of this boot was if you encountered icing or any severe icing, it would knock it off. And this was critical to the plane because we were up in where the ice and snow was plentiful, and we were flying through ice storms and everything else often, and quite frankly, those boots saved my life, which I'll tell you in a minute. But well, that was about it. I got to the Aleutians. You want to go from there?
Certainly, that had been quite an experience.
Well,
Different?
it was. I'd never been up in anything like that in my life, and anyone who's never been there, my recommendation is don't go. It's a mass of ice, sheer rocks, unbelievable. No vegetation of any kind, kind of a tundra effect, but no trees. We didn't see a tree up there. And it's 1,000 miles from when you start at the eastern end of the islands to get to the end. So you go from one end to the other end. And we stopped at a couple of islands on the way, Cold Bay and Chitka, and stationed there for a day or two, fighting the weather already to begin with. This was in October 1943. And the whole area, the whole time we were up there for 9 months, it was a case of the enemy is the weather. The weather. We saw, well, we can get to the other later, but one of the key things in it all was fighting the weather. Our purpose in being up there was twofold, really. First of all, it was to fly out of these islands pie-shaped segments of search out in the northern Pacific Ocean, Bering Sea, and that area, looking for anything, submarines primarily, any surface ships, other aircraft, and that kind of thing. And we flew these fairly regularly. I guess Mac and I we flew about 50 or 55 of those missions, and the whole time just out in pie shape looking. And again, our major problem there was making sure it was weather. We encountered very little in the way of any enemy operation of any kind. It was late in the war, well, fairly late in the war, but it was after Attu, the westernmost island, had been retaken from the Japanese. Most people don't know the Japanese literally took the island of Attu, the westernmost island in the Aleutians, and we had to get in there and fight and take it back. And it was a bloody, horrible thing. And we got up there just a few months after it was taken. We were not the first ones up there, and there were Army aircraft up there, there were Marine and Navy. But in any event, that was our mission, was to do these pie-shaped searches. Later on, as a matter of fact, in November, December, a month or so after we got up there, we were given another assignment. The island of Attu is 750 miles from the northern part of Japan. Northernmost island, Paramashiru, is the northernmost island.
I'm sorry, the name of that island?
Paramashiru, P-A-R-A-M-I-S-H-I-R-U. M-U-S-H-I-R-A. I think that's it, pretty close. And there are other islands up there too. But the brass decided that one of the things that they would like to do would be to have us and Army aircraft too, see if we could fly from Attu over and make some semblance of a bombing run in order to let the Japanese know that they had to be worried about a major invasion coming from the north as opposed from the south. MacArthur and all the people that were down there coming up, we had the fleets coming in and that fleet coming in and all that kind of thing, and these horrible island by island raids that we did. So our mission, we weren't the only ones, was to go fly over to Paramaribo, drop our three bombs we had, three 500-pound bombs, and get out and come back and land. And the purpose was to make the Japanese know that we could do it, because we had pretty well assumed that that was too long a flight for any aircraft and carrying any kind of ammunition or bombs to make it, but we proved it could be done. And the Ventura, which I co-pilot one, was one of the planes that did this. We went over single plane at a time, because you couldn't possibly fly formation in that weather. The weather was absolutely unbelievable. We flew through storms that you wouldn't believe, where you couldn't see the water. It was the middle of the night, the middle of the winter, with violent storms of sleet and ice and snow. How we ever got through it, I'll never know. Never had any idea.
How long was the round trip time-wise?
Well, that's a good question. The normal time, from the time you took off until you landed, was somewhere around 8.5 hours, somewhere around in there. So most of our time was flying over and back, and a lot of the time the weather was passable, but most of the time you couldn't see the water and you couldn't see the stars, so you couldn't navigate. You had to do dead reckoning, and this is something. Whether we made the Japs afraid or not, we don't know, but we do know this, from what we found out later. They did move a lot of defense up north, and anything they moved up north made it much better down south. So that was the overall strategy anyway, which we weren't told to begin with, but we later learned. And those of us that took this trip have told our story many a time, and one of them was on TV last Tuesday night. One of my squadron mates who never made it. And I don't know whether you've ever seen it. It's called The Last Flight of Flight 31, Plane 31. Last something of Plane 31. And he, Walt Whitman, who was a pilot, and his co-pilot, Jack Hanlon, who was a dear friend of mine, they took off on one of these flights and never came back. And we never knew what happened. And that's a whole story all by itself. It took me I could talk to you about that for 10 minutes, which I won't, but in any event, it indicated the severity of the flight itself. And is this an appropriate time for me to go into any more detail than that?
Sure.
People have asked me many a time what was the most exciting or whatever kind of thing you experienced in that area. And it was very simple. It was one flight. Am I to take a lot of time or a little time?
Take as much time as you need.
Well, I have some good stories for you if you'd like to have them.
Absolutely.
I'll have to watch one of them because there's a little profanity in it, so I'll skip that. But in any event, one of the islands near Attu was an island called Shemya. And Shemya, S-H-E-M-Y-A, is a little flat rock, you might say, a couple of miles wide, a couple of miles long, that the Navy fitted for landings in case you couldn't get back into Attu, which was just a few miles away. It at least was a substitute place to land if the weather was bad there. And one time a couple of times, we couldn't get back into Attu after flying not only the missions over to, never on the ones we flew to Japan, but on these other 50 search missions. We landed there. And one time, there was one of the only buildings on this whole thing, aside from they're all Quonset huts, things like this that can't be blown away, was a latrine with 15 seats all along the rear, and dug into the ice up below. And I was in there one time when they came back. I happened to be alone, and as I was sitting there, the door opened and in walked a bald-headed man. I guess he was 40, 45 years old, and sat down next to me, and looked at me kind of funny. And in terms of amusing stories, I'll just put it this way. He indicated that this was a very welcome thing. He was in civilian clothes, by the way. And I said, "Aren't you Errol Flynn?" He said, "Yes." And that led to another story, because he was on his way up there on the USO tour, and they couldn't get it at Attu, so they stopped in Schengen. And he was up there to put on a show, which I later saw when all of us got back to Attu. And we had, now if I'm going in too much.
No, not at all. Go ahead.
Okay. Before we left the States, we spent some time in the San Francisco area and went to a Navy hangout for Navy officers. It was a place called the Blue Fox Cafe. And there was a Blue Fox up over the bar there, and Mario, the owner and the bartender, said, "If you guys ever get up the Aleutians, they'll bring me back up the Blue Fox." So, darned if we didn't get up the Aleutians, and two of our idiot friends went out and literally caught a live blue fox. I've got pictures of it, as a matter of fact. And we didn't know what to do with it. We said, "Well, just take it back with us." And we were told, "No, you can't take that back with you. Rules." So I told the story to Flynn. And I said, "How about you taking it back? You got a lot of pull, I'm sure." And he said, "Sure, I'll take it back." And darned if he didn't organize it in some way, where one of the CBs made a little thing, a carrier. They put it in. One of our guys from Jackson, Mississippi, knew what to feed him and all that. And he did. And we left the island. He came over, or had his men come over. He didn't himself. And take this darn blue fox. Well, the end of the story is that when about 3 weeks later, another plane came up with newspapers from Los Angeles and San Francisco and Seattle and all that. But one of the squibs was, "Errol Flynn has just come back from the Aleutian Islands, and guess what he's inviting the girls up to see in his room? A live blue fox." And he was supposed to have delivered that thing to the Blue Fox Cafe in San Francisco, and when we got back, they never got it.
Oh.
So when I go to the movies now, and every time Errol Flynn comes on, I go, "Shh," or worse.
He let you down.
Yeah.
That's an interesting story.
Well, any more? Do you want more?
Well, when you were up there and you weren't flying missions, what did you do? What did you eat? What did you
flew
do?
about every other day. The main thing we did was read and play cards. A lot of that. We played bridge and poker primarily. And we wrote letters, and I read more up there than I did, I guess, ever before, since even at school. So the weather mostly was terribly cold and snowy in the winter, and wet, muddy in the spring.
Were you already married at the time?
I was not married.
Not at the
No,
time, okay.
no,
So
I
your
was not.
letters home were mainly to your...
My mother, and my brother was an officer in a destroyer, and we exchanged letters. My sister was married with a child in Connecticut, so I communicated with them and with them.
Had to be amazing, though, to get letters all the way up in Alaska. How long did it take generally?
Remarkably short time. I would say less than a week, for mostly. They really did themselves a good job of getting communications up there.
Now, you didn't spend the whole time up there in Alaska.
No, I didn't. That was my first tour. And when I left there in July, late July of 44, and came back and was assigned to another squadron organizing in San Francisco. And this was a squadron with a PV-2, a variation of this plane, but almost the same thing. The reason for it, they'd had some people thought this was too dangerous to fly, quite frankly. And there weren't very many. It was too much aimed at bad weather. And if you go in the South Pacific, where I went after that, we didn't need a lot of that stuff. So it was a little bit slower, a little bit safer, a little bit slower landing speed, a little bit slower, less takeoff speed, but the same basic thing. We went from, after training in Alameda
Alameda, California.
Alameda, California, and Montreal, California, which is right near San Jose. We were trained in those two places, and in the new PB-2. Got a new crew, and then I became a senior pilot then. I'd been a co-pilot before, and I was the captain of this thing. I had my own co-pilot and crew of 4. And we went from there, and some of the people who were in the squadron incident they were old friends of mine from training days. So it was a fun deal. A lot of fun. A lot of fun. San Francisco especially. In any event, we were sent to Hawaii and spent some time in Hawaii, in Honolulu area, Kaneohe. And sometime on Midway Island, which had just been taken in a major battle a few months before that. We flew some missions out of there, search missions. But then we were sent on to island hopping, Johnston Island, and we talked Kwajalein, Majuro, some of those, and ended up on Tinian, which is Tinian, T-I-N-I-A-N, is a sister island with Saipan, which both had just been taken not too many months before we got there, but they had been taken and it was reasonably safe. And we flew search missions out of there. Our purpose there was primarily to make sure that the islands that had been bypassed as the people advanced, that we advanced on Japan, were not getting reinforcements and that kind of thing. So we flew missions. The major island that Japan was never taken from was Truk, T-R-U-K. It was a major Japanese stronghold. But we, instead of attacking it, we bypassed it and let it sort of atrophy. And it took a while to do that. But in any event, that was one of the main islands that when we made our search missions, which we did, because we flew every third day or so up there. Again, 15 planes. Incidentally, in our squadron in the Aleutians, we only lost 2 planes, which is pretty good. In the Tinian, we lost none. So we didn't hit the major action. The only thing I can say about Tinian is that flying these missions was sort of fun because the weather was good. I played a lot of softball and that kind of thing. Tennis, believe it or not. I'm almost ashamed to admit that when I came back home and my kids said, or not my kids, my friends said, well, where were you when the peace came about and the Japanese survived? And I said, well, I got the news. Guess where I was? On the island of Tinian. They expected to say I was holding a gun. I was playing tennis. Well, that blew my image, believe me. In any event, the only other interesting story I think I can tell you that is major in my life was near the end of the war, the USS Indianapolis, a heavy cruiser, brought the atom bomb out to Tinian. And we had heard rumors that there was a bomb on the island, that if anybody just touched it, the whole island was going to blow up. We didn't know any more about it than that. We got all our information, incidentally, of that kind from our enlisted men. They knew much more than the officers about anything. And my crew chief, he knew everything that was going on. He should have been an admiral. But in any event, it turns out that the next thing I knew was one morning about 7 o'clock in the morning, or 6:30 or something like that. It was in this Quonset hut again, with mosquito netting around and that kind of thing. My crew chief, who wasn't supposed to, came roaring in. I was still asleep. He woke me up and he said, Mr. Erickson, we have to be in the air in 10 minutes. I said, why? And he said, I don't know. I said, great, get the guys together, we'll go. I threw my clothes on, ran out, and he had the plane out and warmed up. It turned out, well, I was told by my superior and also the tower to the two gentlemen would be coming aboard the plane, and you're to fly them to Guam. Now, Guam is close to Tinian, about an hour and a half flight or something like that. And two high officers, much superior to me, came aboard, never said a word to me, sat in the back, and I flew them down to Guam, landed, and as I went down to the end of the runway, and where I was to let them off at a particular place, they got off with their briefcase, and a fella came out from this little hut, and it was one of my buddies from the Aleutians. I said, "What are you doing down here?" He said, well, he gave me a long story about how he had been grounded. I said, "Do you know why I'm here?" And he said, "Sure I do." I said, "What is it?" He said, "We just dropped an atom bomb yesterday, and when the Enola Gay got back to Tinian, they quick put them on another plane to fly them to Guam, from where they were going to go to Washington, D.C. And en route from Tinian to Guam, they found out in the total confusion in the madhouse that the bombardier had left his briefcase on Tinian. So that was what I took. So I claimed to all my friends that this is a major point in my life, that I flew the bombardier's briefcase from Tinian to Guam, and one of my friends is rather high up in the Yale friend, and things that who wrote some books. I said, "Mac, you didn't even put this in your book." And he said, "No, nobody paid any attention to it." But that's my claim to fame.
Now, you received an Air Medal. Can you
Yes.
tell us a little bit about what led to that?
That was primarily for the trips over Japan from the Aleutians. We all got air medals, and there was some chuckling about that because we claimed that Army pilots got an air medal if they took off 5 times from a community airport. But we had to fly to Japan and back to get one. But, we were just kidding.
You had two very contrasting experiences
Oh,
with Alaska
completely.
and the islands.
Completely. Totally different.
Preference one or the other, or?
Oh, if I had to do it again, oh, give me the islands. Sure, but the Aleutian experience was a wonderful one for one major reason. I survived, and we survived. Some of my buddies didn't. And I was seeing them it was on Nova, on PBS last Tuesday night. Seeing them there was kind of heartwarming, heart-chilling. Yeah, if I had to do it over again, I'd do it. But at my age, I can't figure out why in the world I wasn't scared to death. And I guess I really was. Because the night before the first trip we made to the over Japan, we were told to go sleep, go back to sleep. Not one of us could. So instead of that, I said, I'm going to watch an evening movie. And I stayed and watched it. It was Mrs. Miniver. I'll never forget it. First time I ever saw it. And instead of sleeping, I watched that.
And this is before the first time you go over Japan. Had they already surrendered at that point?
No. This was 1944.
This is when you were still up in Alaska.
43, 44. Yeah, I was still up in Alaska. And if I may ramble on some more, is that okay?
Sure.
I did not tell you the story of the most terrifying thing that ever happened to me in the plane. One of the trips, somebody said she was going to go along on the trip with it, and her name was Olivia de Havilland, who was up there on a USO tour too. She said, I'm going to go on the trip. No, you can't do that. In any event, we took off that one horrible night, and got over, dropped our bombs, came back, and on the way back, we had horrible weather coming in over. And coming back, as we were leaving the area over there, luckily we got there, how we ever got there I don't know, we had a magician for a navigator. They used information about weather that came beforehand from others that had done it. Coming back, we got lost. And we were for about an hour or two, we were in an ice mist. No wind, no nothing, just ice mist. Couldn't see up, couldn't see down, couldn't see anything. And then we began losing some instruments. Our speedometer, our airspeed indicator froze. We didn't know how fast we were going. We were going, and then fortunately, our altimeter worked, and we found that as we were going along, we were beginning to accumulate ice on these wings that I described to you earlier. And when it got a little to the point where we were supposed to, we exercised the boots, as we call them. It got so bad they didn't work. So the ice was forming over the top of the boots also. And I could see it was right outside my window there. He couldn't, I could too, my pilot. And so the more ice that got on there, the more power we had to put on to keep altitude. The moment we kept same altitude, we were going down. And that's easy enough to figure. And at one point, I guess we were 1,000. We started out at like 10,000 feet. We're down to somewhere around 1,000 feet or so. And he would, at full throttle. And you can't take in any airplane, I know, at least back then. This is all propeller, no jets back then at all. And put them in full power for a very long, I'll tell you 10 minutes, something like that. But we were at a point where we had to use almost full power, and then finally full power, in order to just stay afloat. Finally, we were about 500 feet. We broke out of the mist, and you could see. And we were right down on a raging, wild ocean. And off to one side were some black rocks, with waves crashing over them. And we were supposed to be hundreds of miles away from any kind of rock formation or islands that was protruding. And it turned out that we were using a navigation guess when we left over there and got in this mist that presumed that the winds were basically coming from the north to south and blowing us south, so we were correcting and aiming up that way. It turned out it was just the opposite was true. The winds were coming from the south and blew us up there. And the fact that we came down right where these rocks were, our navigator said there's only one thing it can be. It's the Komandorsky Islands, the tip of them. That's a big group of KOM something, Komandorsky, group of islands that are far north of where we're supposed to be. We said that's the only thing it can possibly be, which means we're 100 miles too far to the north. And so we were, when the moment we got out of the mist, the ice started to fall off the wings. And we were staggering along, literally staggering along at almost full power and backing off to save fuel. And then the sky eased up and everything was peaceful. We only had one real problem. Where were we? And the navigator said, if we were 100 miles north, if that was the beginning of the Komandorsky Islands there, then we're too far north and this should be our route. And it was the only chance we had, and we made it. And when we landed, it was you should hear the screaming when we saw the islands. You can imagine loving to see a rocky cliff covered with ice and say, bless you. We did. And when we landed, we'd been in the air about 9.5 hours, a little bit more than we were supposed to be. And when we landed, they checked the tanks, and we had enough gas left for somewhere between 4 and 5 minutes.
Wow.
So after 9.5 hours, you tell me, am I lucky to be here?
You're lucky to be here.
Okay. Some of my stories.
The navigator, obviously, that's his job, but when you're so lost, how much discussion was there amongst the crew, or did you leave it to him?
No, the navigator's back in the back, and we got intercoms, of course. And most of the conversation here was between Grange McKinney, my pilot, Mac, and the navigator. And I could hear it on my thing. And Mac and he were talking all the time. I entered into the whole picture occasionally. But I had to take no credit for the whole thing. I give it to my pilot. And the navigator, his name was Hugo Melberg from Minnesota, who's now dead. We hugged him.
I'll bet. Must have been great to be on the ground. So everybody on the ground knew you had been missing. They must have been wondering where you were. And
anyways, we were almost an hour late. And, another guy that was lost. It was in the movie that was on last week. When he didn't show up, we never knew for 50 years where he was until recently. Tokyo Rose, we could get on the radio up there, and she announced the next morning after Walt was lost, "Oh, we got your buddies last night. What do you think of that?" This is the next day after we lost one of our pilots, and they found his plane on the Russian mountainside, just north of Japan.
But that was recently.
Oh, that was right after the.
Oh, right after.
It was right after we made our first trip. At the same time period, he was making one of these raids over Japan just as we were doing the same thing, and this is a little bit right in between our 5 trips that we did. Am I doing too much?
No, you're fine.
Okay.
But we're going to go back to now. You're on the Pacific, and the war is
Okay.
wrapping up.
Okay.
Did you ever go to Japan?
No.
From that point? Okay,
No.
so you.
The moment the armistice was signed, or truce, or whatever you call it, we were told to prepare to go back home. Then it was simply the case, who are the lucky guys that can go first? There's a little profanity involved in that too.
Now, you had said that your planes were land-based, but they just went via carrier to. How were they brought over? Did you
On
fly
the carrier,
them over?
we went over on the USS Intrepid, which is now in the news, as a matter of fact, and the planes were put aboard the aircraft carrier, and we went aboard and simply were taken from San Francisco to Pearl Harbor.
Okay.
And then from that point, you would fly them to where you needed to go.
Then they were taken off, and at an airstrip nearby, and we flew them around the mountain over to Kaneohe is the name of the base. That was about 30 miles from Honolulu.
So you go to Hawaii on the way back when the war is over?
Yeah. We island hopped out, we island hopped back.
Where did you last leave your plane?
Leave it?
When you're done, the last time you fly this plane, where do you leave it? And how was that experience for you?
You mean the last time?
The last time.
Our plane. First of all, you have different planes. You don't necessarily fly your own aircraft at the same time. It so happens that the plane that Walt Whitman lost on the Russian mountain, I had personally flown several months before that. I got it from the numbers. So when I landed on Hawaii, coming back for the last time, I was in a plane that my crew and I had used most of the time out there, but not necessarily every time. And there was some emotion involved in it, but not much. And my major emotion was, I really didn't particularly care. I'm so grateful to be here.
So you leave the plane in Hawaii. You get
What
on
they
board.
did with it, I have no idea what they did with it. I couldn't care less.
Then you boarded a ship.
Then we boarded a ship coming back, the Bonhomme Richard. I'll never forget it then.
What was the name of the ship?
Bonhomme Richard. The Bonnie Dick.
And what port did you come into?
We came into San Francisco. And big signs up, welcome home, and all that kind of stuff. And I feel a little funny about that, I guess, because most of the other guys, or a lot of them, had girlfriends and wives and all that waving there, and I wasn't. So I felt a little bit funny about that, but not much. I made up for it later.
Okay. So then, where did you go after San Francisco? What was home for you to come home to?
Home was Oak Park.
Oak Park.
Yes.
Okay.
Oak Park, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. I said two things. I'm not going to go to work back to Sears, I don't know, why not? And I'm not going to go to Chicago, so I did both. And Sears, since I'd had a couple of years out in the sticks, gave me a very menial job in the buying departments, and which I accepted. And progressed from there. I had 2 or 3 promotions to buying jobs. And my last job with Sears was being senior buyer of living room upholstered furniture for the country. And one of the companies that I did business with was a company here in Atlanta. And when their sales manager got ill, they asked me if I'd like to come down to Atlanta and give up the cold north and come on down where life is easy and everybody loves everybody, and incidentally there'll be a Buick automobile there for you. They're all expenses paid. I said, let me have it.
What year was that?
That was 1953. And my wife, I'd been married at that time and had 2 children. And we had a long talk about leaving my home, the park, and coming down here, but we just said, we'll do it. And we had a couple more girls after that, so now we're natives now of Atlanta.
I'd say you've been here a long time.
1953.
Can we just back up a little bit? Where did you meet your wife?
She too went to Oak Park High School. The problem was she was 6.5 years younger than I was. But her older brother and my younger brother were best friends. And they were neighbors. So I was familiar with the family. And of course, I didn't know her until I came back from the war. And I don't even remember her. But it was a natural thing for me to meet her. And my mother was the one that arranged it.
The matchmaker.
She was the matchmaker.
And your wife's name?
Charlotte.
Charlotte.
Yeah.
And you had how many children? 4
Two
children.
Two girls. They're all doing pretty well.
And their names?
Tom Jr., Steve, Peg, and Margaret, and Kristen. Kristen and Peg and Steve all live in this area now. Tommy lives in Philadelphia. And he's coming down next week. His daughter is going to Emory. So we'll be seeing him. And they're all not really rousing successes, but they're all doing okay.
And grandchildren?
11.
11 grandchildren.
grandchildren.
Wonderful.
And 2 great-grandchildren.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, before we wrap up here, is there anything else you'd like to put on the tape that perhaps is just coming back to you or something you
Well, I think
want to add?
the main thing is my reaction to what's going on in the world now, and I'm not going to tell anybody how you should think, but I'm being so deeply involved in anti-war as I was before Pearl Harbor. I have some great sympathy for people who are anti-war now. I probably still would be, and I know the difference between then and now is enormous. That was a good war, this is a bad war, and all that. But Mike, I guess if I had any preaching to do, I'd say keep on complaining, folks, but don't blame the system. Period. Don't try it. Let's keep the system. Yell all they want to. That's all I say.
The World War II Memorial opened this year in Washington, D.C. Do you have plans to see it? Did you?
No. I've given a lot of this information to the U.S. Navy Memorial in Washington. I have set my picture in and a brief biography and that kind of thing. I am registered there. And but in the World War II thing, number one, I'm not going there because my wife and I just are too old to travel right now. I'm lucky enough to be able to still play some golf, horribly by the way, but we don't travel. I'd like to go up and see it, but I just think we're kind of overdoing this memorial thing. A memorial for this and memorial for that. Not for me.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Wait a minute. I do have a couple of more comments that I'd like to make. They have to do with the atom bomb, and I think it's important that I say it. First of all, I did refer to this a while back about my so-called my flight that I took from Tinian to Guam to take the briefcase of the bombardier to the Enola Gay. And somebody might say, well, why in the world was your plane selected? Well, just very briefly, and I don't want to belabor this. At that field, and there were several fields on Tinian, but that airfield, one of our planes and crews was assigned each day to be the sort of the standby plane to go on any special visits that had to be made, trips that had to be made. And my plane was the plane for that day. And that's how I happened to be chosen for that flight. As I said, I don't want to overdo it, but that's why. Another reason is that somebody might ask, why in the world would a Navy plane be doing that errand for an Army plane that made the trip? And I think the answer to that is, although I'm not sure, is that the bombardier for the Enola Gay was a Navy officer, by the way. I don't know how many people know that. He was a three-striper, and conceivably he wanted his error in leaving the bag on Tinian to be corrected by a Navy pilot. I don't know. In any event, that's how I got involved. Now the important thing. I'm going to take you a couple of years after the war, and I was working in Chicago. Now, I was on a flight to New York on business, and my seatmate was a very distinguished, small, grandfatherly-looking man, kind face, and he, at one point in the flight, looked at me and asked whether I was in the service or not. I had been in the service, and I told him yes. And he drew me out, largely as you're doing today to me, and wanted to know something about my experiences there. And at one point said, how did you feel about the drop of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima? And I said, well, of course I was all for it, because it probably saved my life, and the life of my buddies, because we were would be in the attacking force if we ever had to attack Japan. We were out there right away. And therefore, there were estimates that there were going to be about 1 million casualties of that, Japanese and Americans. So, to my mind, yes, it was a horrible thing, horrible, and the 80,000 or so people that were killed at Hiroshima is a disgrace to mankind. But it had to be done. Japan was being run by maniacs, not telling their people anything. They didn't know what was wrong. We tried to warn them about the bomb. We sent messages to their headquarters and said, surrender now or we're going to hit you bad. The poor people in the field in Hiroshima didn't know, although we did drop leaflets a day or two beforehand to get out of town. So I would say overall it was an event in the world that would go down as one of the most important things that ever happened. It changed the whole world. You had a bomb dropped in. And I'm all for it. I'm sorry that there are those who, and I told this to all of this gentleman, those, including one very prominent newscaster, who said we never should have dropped it, and there are others, theologians and others, who said no, it was the wrong thing to do. I would love to sit down and discuss that with each of them because I think they were wrong, dead wrong. Harry Truman did not make the decision to drop the bomb. That was made by military people, but they had to get his permission, and God bless him, he said yes. When I finished, this gentleman turned to me and said, I'm extremely interested in this. I looked at him, and I said, somehow or other I know you. And I had seen this picture, and it turned out it was a man by the name of Harold Urey, U-R-E-Y, Urey. And he was one of the handful of creators of the atom bomb. And he was a famous man anywhere as others were. But he was there at the time the first bomb went off at White Sands, and I turned to him and said, tell me what you think. And he did. And he told me the following story. He said, I've had worries about this all the way through. What were we doing to mankind by creating this bomb? And I was a part of it. And at the time of the first test in White Sands, we had a little shack that was I guess a mile or two away from the supposed bomb detonation point. And we were huddled down, a few of us were huddled down there, on our knees, literally, looking out through a slit in the side of the shack for the explosion. And he said, we counted down the last 15 seconds or so were extremely difficult for me, I guess, and perhaps for others, because I did have these terrible reservations about what we were doing. And as the timing went down, he said, got 10, 5, 4, and that kind of thing, I prayed. And he said, I prayed it wouldn't work. And I remember that phrase, well, he said, I just couldn't believe that we really were doing the right thing. Here was a man that helped create it. And we talked a little after that, but we landed, and I thanked him for how frankly he had been with me, and he thanked me for my talk, and I'll never forget it. That's my story.